When we examine a poll reporting that a political figure has 19% odds for a future presidential election, the first and most important step is to understand what that number truly represents. A poll is not a prophecy. It is not a guarantee of victory or defeat. It is a measurement of opinion at a specific moment in time based on a limited sample of respondents. That distinction is essential for any serious evaluation of political data. Polling organizations typically survey a selected group of individuals who are meant to reflect the broader voting population because it is impractical to ask every voter in the country for their opinion. Pollsters rely on statistical sampling methods. If the sample is properly constructed, accounting for age, gender, region, political affiliation, and other demographic factors, it can provide a reasonably accurate snapshot of public sentiment. However, it remains a snapshot, not the full picture. The margin of error is another critical concept. Every credible poll includes a margin of error, often around plus or minus 3 to 4 percentage points. This means that a reported 19% could realistically represent support slightly lower or higher within that range. Small differences between candidates may not be statistically significant at all. Without understanding this margin, people can misinterpret minor fluctuations as dramatic shifts. Timing also matters. Polls conducted years before an election measure name recognition, general impressions, and early enthusiasm rather than firm voting decisions. Many respondents have not yet researched candidates in depth. Some may answer based on familiarity rather than policy alignment. Others may change their preferences as campaigns unfold, debates occur, economic conditions shift, or new issues arise. Early numbers are often fluid and volatile. Question wording further influences results. The way a question is framed can subtly shape how respondents think about their answer. For example, asking about electability versus personal preference can produce different outcomes. Additionally, whether respondents are asked to choose from a full list of candidates or allowed to volunteer a name independently can significantly affect percentages. It is also important to distinguish between different types of polls. Some measure favorability, others measure head-to-head matchups, and still others estimate perceived chances of winning. These are not interchangeable metrics. A candidate could have low favorability but still be competitive in a divided field or vice versa. Ultimately, understanding a poll requires looking beyond the headline number. One must consider who conducted the survey, how large the sample was, when it was taken, what questions were asked, and what the margin of error is. Only then can we interpret a figure like 19% responsibly. Polls are tools for gauging opinion, not definitive judgments about political destiny. When discussing early presidential polling, it is essential to understand that these surveys occur long before most voters are fully engaged in the election process. Years ahead of a presidential election, public attention is often divided among economic concerns, international events, cultural debates, and local political issues. For many citizens, the next presidential race is not yet a priority. As a result, early polling numbers frequently reflect surface-level impressions rather than deeply considered decisions. Voters may respond based on recent media coverage, general party preference, or simple name familiarity, rather than a careful comparison of policies and leadership qualities. Another important factor is the fluid nature of political environments. Economic conditions can shift rapidly. A strong economy today may weaken tomorrow, or an unexpected crisis may elevate certain leadership traits in the public eye. History shows that major events, financial downturns, global conflicts, public health emergencies, or Supreme Court decisions can dramatically reshape voter priorities. A candidate polling at 19% several years before an election may benefit from future developments that align with their experience or message. Conversely, a candidate leading early polls may struggle if circumstances change in ways that highlight their weaknesses. Additionally, early polling often occurs before the full field of candidates is known. Some potential contenders may not have announced their campaigns, and others may be testing the waters privately. When voters are asked about hypothetical matchups or early primary preferences, they are responding to incomplete information. Once official campaigns begin, debates are held, and advertising increases, public perception can change substantially. Campaign performance matters. A compelling debate performance, an effective grassroots strategy, or strong fundraising numbers can significantly boost a candidate's standing over time. Name recognition plays a particularly powerful role in early surveys. Well-known political figures or individuals with high national media exposure often appear stronger in early polls simply because voters recognize their names. However, recognition does not necessarily equal commitment. There is a significant difference between someone saying, "I've heard of that person," and "I am firmly committed to voting for that person in a primary or general election." As campaigns progress, voters often become more informed about policy differences, leadership styles, and ideological positions, which can cause early support to shift. It is also important to consider voter psychology. Early in an election cycle, many respondents treat polling questions as expressions of general preference rather than firm decisions. They may change their minds multiple times before casting an actual ballot. Political scientists frequently note that voter opinions become more stable as the election approaches, particularly after party conventions and sustained media coverage clarify the choices. For these reasons, early presidential polling should be viewed as a preliminary indicator of visibility and current sentiment rather than a reliable prediction of final outcomes. The closer the election date, the more meaningful the polling tends to become. Until then, numbers like 19% reflect possibility, not destiny. When examining early presidential polling, one of the most misunderstood factors is the difference between name recognition and genuine voter commitment. These two concepts may appear similar on the surface, but they represent very different levels of political support. Understanding this distinction is essential when interpreting numbers such as a 19% standing in a national poll. Name recognition refers to how familiar voters are with a political figure. In early election cycles, many respondents have not yet researched candidates in depth. Instead, they respond to names they have heard frequently in the news, seen on television, or encountered through social media. Familiarity can strongly influence polling responses, even if that familiarity is neutral or negative. Psychological research shows that people are more likely to select options they recognize, especially when they lack detailed information about alternatives. This is sometimes called the mere exposure effect. In political polling, this effect can temporarily inflate or stabilize numbers without reflecting deep enthusiasm. Voter commitment, however, is a much stronger and more meaningful measure. Commitment involves a conscious decision to support a candidate based on policies, leadership style, ideology, or perceived effectiveness. Committed voters are more likely to donate money, volunteer, attend rallies, defend a candidate publicly, and most importantly, show up to vote in primaries and general elections. A poll that simply measures preference does not always distinguish between casual selection and firm allegiance. Early in an election cycle, many respondents fall into what political scientists call soft support. They may indicate a preference when asked, but they are open to changing their minds. Their choice might shift after debates, campaign advertisements, economic changes, or major national events. In contrast, hard support reflects voters who are unlikely to switch candidates under normal circumstances. The key issue is that most early polls capture a mix of soft and hard support without clearly separating the two. Additionally, name recognition can sometimes mask vulnerability. A well-known political figure may score modestly because many voters are aware of them but remain undecided about their leadership qualities. High recognition combined with lukewarm enthusiasm is very different from lower recognition paired with passionate grassroots backing. Campaigns often focus first on increasing visibility, but long-term success depends on converting recognition into conviction. Therefore, when evaluating polling data, it is critical to ask deeper questions. Are voters expressing strong support or casual preference? Are they informed about policy positions? Would they prioritize this candidate when voting, donating, or mobilizing others? Poll numbers alone cannot answer these questions. True political strength is measured not just by how many people recognize a name, but by how many are willing to stand firmly behind it when the election arrives. National image and political branding are central to understanding why a candidate's polling numbers may rise or fall, especially in a national race. When a political leader moves from governing a single state to seeking national office, the scale of public perception changes dramatically. A governor may be highly visible and influential within their state, but national voters often evaluate them through a different lens. That lens includes media portrayal, partisan narratives, cultural symbolism, and broader ideological debates. In many cases, voters outside a candidate's home state rely more on headlines and commentary than on detailed knowledge of policy achievements or legislative records. Political branding refers to the overall identity a candidate projects to the public. This includes leadership style, communication tone, policy priorities, and even personality traits. In modern politics, branding functions much like it does in business. Voters often form impressions based on repeated themes: competence, crisis management, economic stewardship, cultural values, or reform-oriented leadership. If a candidate is consistently associated with controversial policies or polarizing issues, that perception can shape national electability regardless of the full policy context. Once a narrative becomes widespread, it can be difficult to reverse. Media ecosystems amplify this effect. Cable news networks, digital outlets, podcasts, and social media platforms all contribute to shaping a politician's brand. Supporters and critics both participate in framing the narrative. A governor known for progressive policies, for example, may be praised as forward-thinking in some regions while being criticized as extreme in others. Because presidential elections require appealing to a broad coalition across diverse states, candidates must manage how their record is interpreted beyond their political base. Geography also matters. Policies that are popular in large coastal states may not resonate the same way in Midwestern or Southern regions. Economic conditions, cultural values, and demographic factors influence how voters interpret leadership decisions. National campaigns, therefore, involve translating a state-level record into a message that speaks to varied communities. A successful political brand must balance authenticity with adaptability, maintaining core principles while broadening appeal. Another important factor is crisis leadership. Moments such as economic downturns, public health emergencies, or natural disasters often define how leaders are perceived nationally. Effective communication during crisis can strengthen a candidate's image as decisive and competent. Conversely, perceived missteps can become central talking points for opponents. In the age of viral media, short clips and sound bites can reinforce or undermine a carefully constructed brand within hours. Ultimately, national image is not built overnight. It develops over time through consistent messaging, policy outcomes, public appearances, and debate performances. Political branding influences not only poll numbers, but also fundraising, endorsements, and grassroots enthusiasm. Understanding this concept helps explain why early polling may reflect broader perceptions rather than detailed evaluations of policy. In presidential politics, image and branding are inseparable from electoral viability.